Today I'm beginning chapter 9, called The Acceptance of the Atonement. The first section is called The Acceptance of Reality. Fear of the will of God is one of the strangest beliefs that the human mind has ever made. It could not possibly have occurred unless the mind were already profoundly split, making it possible for it to be afraid of what it really is. Reality cannot threaten anything except illusions, since reality can only uphold truth. The very fact that the will of God, which is what you are, is perceived as fearful, demonstrates that you are afraid of what you are. It is not, then, the will of God of which you are afraid, but yours. So this first paragraph is describing to us how, in truth, we are afraid of our truth. It's not God that we're really afraid of, it's ourselves. It's our belief in the ego that we're afraid of. That is what terrifies us. And the only reason we believe in that is because our mind is split. And he's reminding us that God is not frightening or threatening at all. But the ego has convinced us to be afraid of God, when really it is the ego that is bringing the fear, not God. Your will is not the ego's, and that is why the ego is against you. Okay, our will is God's will, and ego is against that. What seems to be the fear of God is really the fear of your own reality. It is impossible to learn anything consistently in a state of panic. That's what the ego puts us in, a state of panic. If the purpose of this course is to help you remember what you are, and if you believe that what you are is fearful, then it must follow that you will not learn this course. So as long as we are in fear and we are believing what the ego is telling us, we're not going to be able to learn this course. Yet the reason for the course is that you do not know what you are. We need this course because we don't know what we are, and this course is teaching us what we are. If you do not know what your reality is, why would you be so sure that it is fearful? The association of truth and fear, which would be highly artificial at most, is particularly inappropriate in the minds of those who do not know what truth is. Wow, that was a mouthful to say. Ego knows nothing. Ego doesn't know our truth, but spirit does know our truth. And that the ego has tricked us into being afraid of God and afraid of our truth. We've been tricked. All this could mean is that you are arbitrarily associating something beyond your awareness with something you do not want. It is evident then that you are judging something of which you are totally unaware. You have set up this strange situation so that it is impossible to escape from it without a guide who does know what your reality is. That's Holy Spirit or Jesus. That's our guide. The purpose of this guide is merely to remind you of what you want. He is not attempting to force an alien will upon you. He is merely making every possible effort within the limits you impose on him to re-establish your own will in your awareness. Okay, so he's telling us that he's just trying to re-establish our connection to spirit, which is our truth, which is who and what we really are. We forgot, we've been tricked by the ego. That's why we don't know who and what we really are. So that's why he's telling us we need a guide. We need Holy Spirit or Jesus to lead us out of this dream, to awaken us to our truth. You have imprisoned your will beyond your own awareness, where it remains but cannot help you. So we took our truth and we imprisoned it with our belief in the ego. So when it's imprisoned, our truth can't help us because we can't hear it because we're not looking at it and we're not believing it. So that's why we need this course to teach us how to do that. When I said that the Holy Spirit's function is to sort out the true from the false in your mind, I meant that he has the power to look into what you have hidden and recognize the will of God there. His recognition of this will can make it real to you because he is in your mind, and therefore he is your reality. If then his perception of your mind brings its reality to you, he is helping you to remember what you are. The only source of fear in this process is what you think you will lose. Yet it is only what the Holy Spirit sees that you can possibly have. So, what are we afraid of losing? The world. We're afraid of losing things that are of the ego's perception, because that's what we're used to. That's what we think life is and the world is that ego perception. But it's not true. And in reality, we can only have what Holy Spirit sees because that is our only truth. I have emphasized many times that the Holy Spirit will never call upon you to sacrifice anything. But this is why the ego doesn't want to give up the world, because it believes it has to sacrifice. But he's telling us here, no, that's not true. It's just the lie that the ego tells us to keep us trapped in the world. But if you ask the sacrifice of reality of yourself, the Holy Spirit must remind you that this is not God's will because it is not yours. So the ego has convinced us that when we give up the ego and its perception, we're sacrificing something, but we're being told here that's not true. And when we believe in the ego, in truth, we are sacrificing our truth. We are sacrificing our peace by believing in the ego. There is no difference between your will and God's. If you did not have a split mind, you would recognize that willing is salvation because it is communication. All right. So there's no difference between our will and God's because we are the same as God and we will the same thing, which is to extend love eternally. If our mind wasn't split and we weren't confused, we would recognize that we have the same will as God. And when we align with that, that is salvation because it's communication. Communication means real communication between us and God or us and spirit, which is knowing our truth. It's the same as practicing forgiveness, just being aware of the truth, perceiving our truth. It is impossible to communicate in alien tongues. The ego speaks in alien tongues. You and your creator can communicate through creation because that and only that is your joint will. So again, true communication is knowing our truth, and that is our joint will with God. A divided mind cannot communicate because it speaks for different things to the same mind. All right, another way to talk about our split mind, he's calling it a divided mind here. The reason it's speaking for different things is because a split mind or divided mind is believing both ego and spirit. And he's saying this loses the ability to communicate simply because confused communication does not mean anything. They cancel each other out. Nothing's happening if you have a split mind. You're going nowhere. A message cannot be communicated unless it makes sense. The only message that makes sense is God's message or Holy Spirit's message, which is the message of love, peace, oneness. How sensible can your messages be when you ask for what you do not want? So we're constantly asking for the ego, for the ego's world, for the ego's perception, for the ego's beliefs. That's why he's politely making fun of us and saying, how sensible can your messages be when you're aligning with the ego, right? Those messages are not sensible. They make no sense. Because in reality, we do not want ego. As long as you are afraid of your will, that is precisely what you are asking for. So as long as we are afraid of our truth and keep aligning with ego and believing the ego, we are asking for messages that don't make sense. You may insist that the Holy Spirit does not answer you, but it might be wiser to consider the kind of questioner you are. You do not ask only for what you want. This is because you are afraid you might receive it, and you would, meaning that we would exit the dream. And we are afraid of that. Our ego self is afraid of that. Of him, you can never learn what it is, and this gives you the illusion of safety. Yet you cannot be safe from truth, but only in truth. Reality is your only safety. Your will is your salvation because it is the same as God's. The separation is nothing more than the belief that it is different. All right, so the separation is just a belief. It's not even true. It's a belief in ego, and that's why our mind is split. Our will is one with God's, and that is salvation. This is what we will for. So the ego keeps trying to convince us that by hiding in this illusory world, we are safe from God, who the ego has convinced us is out to get us because we destroyed heaven. It's not true. It's a lie. And that's why he's telling us we cannot be safe from our truth, right? We can't hide out here in the illusion thinking that this is keeping us safe. No. He's saying only in truth can we be safe. So only when we identify with our truth are we truly safe. And we are always truly safe. We're just believing that we're not truly safe, believing we are vulnerable when we believe in the ego and the false world. No right mind can believe that its will is stronger than God's. If then a mind believes that its will is different from his, it can only decide either that there is no God or that God's will is fearful. Well, we have a lot of that in our world, don't we? We have a lot of people who are afraid of God, afraid of God's wrath and God's judgment. And we have a lot of people who don't even believe in God at all. So that is what happens when we are identifying with ego. The former accounts for the atheist, meaning one who does not believe in God, and the latter for the martyr, who believes that God demands sacrifices, right? That's religion. That's the religious God, right? Demanding sacrifices. Either of these insane decisions will induce panic because the atheist believes he is alone and the martyr believes that God is crucifying him. All right? And this is how most people think. Yet no one really wants either abandonment or retaliation. You think? Even though many may seek both. Uh-huh. That's what egos do. Egos are seeking abandonment and retaliation. Can you ask the Holy Spirit for gifts such as these? And he puts gifts in quotes because he's being sarcastic, because abandonment and retaliation are not gifts. Can you ask the Holy Spirit for gifts such as these and actually expect to receive them? He cannot give you something you do not want. Right? We don't want abandonment and retaliation. Our ego may want that, but our true self, our spirit self, does not want that. And if we're interested in spirituality and this course, we definitely do not want what the ego has to offer, which is why we are interested in learning our truth. When you ask the universal giver for what you do not want, you are asking for what cannot be given because it was never created. This world was never created. It's not real. It was never created because it was never your will for you. What's our will? Our will is the same as God's. We do not will to be abandoned. We do not will to be separate. We do not will to be in the ego's false world. That's not our true will. Our true will is one with God's. Ultimately, everyone must remember the will of God because ultimately everyone must recognize himself. Once again, we are the will of God. This recognition is the recognition that his will and God's are one. In the presence of truth, there are no unbelievers and no sacrifices. In the security of reality, fear is totally meaningless. To deny what is can only seem to be fearful. Fear cannot be real without a cause, and God is the only cause. God is love, and you do want Him. This is your will. Ask for this, and you will be answered, because you will be asking only for what belongs to you. So our reality is secure. There's no such thing as fear in our reality. That's why fear is totally meaningless in reality, because it doesn't even exist. When he says to deny what is can only seem to be fearful, it's because the ego's perspective only seems to be real, and this world only seems to be real. And then he's telling us that God is love and that we do want the same as God. Our will is the same as his. So we want love too. We want oneness. We want to extend love eternally. And he's saying that when we ask for this, we will be answered because it already belongs to us. It is already who we are. That's why. When you ask the Holy Spirit for what would hurt you, he cannot answer this because nothing can hurt you. And so you are asking for nothing. Any wish that stems from the ego is a wish for nothing. Why? Because the ego is nothing. And to ask for it is not a request. That's a tricky way of saying it doesn't exist. So asking for it is not a real request. It is merely a denial in the form of a request, right? So when we're asking for the ego, when we're asking for the illusory world, when we are asking to believe in that perception, we are simply denying our truth and pretending that we are requesting ego. We are requesting something false when we are wanting the ego. So that's why he's saying it's merely denial in the form of a request. The Holy Spirit is not concerned with form, being aware only of meaning. So form means anything of the world. Form is the entire illusory world because this world isn't real and no form is real. So that's why within this dream world, being aware of only meaning is what Holy Spirit does. Because what's the meaning of the world? Nothing. There's nothing here. But it's to be used for awakening. So the only meaning for form is to overlook it to see the truth, which is spirit. The ego cannot ask the Holy Spirit for anything because there is complete communication failure between them. All right? Ego and spirit cannot communicate. They cannot coexist. There is nothing that they can do together. This is an either or situation. Okay? Yet you can ask for everything of the Holy Spirit because your requests to him are real, being of your right mind. All right? So when we are requesting spirit, requesting our truth, that is real. And that request will be granted because it is already who we are. We're just remembering right now by practicing this course. And by doing that, we are in our right mind. Would the Holy Spirit deny the will of God? No, of course not. And could he fail to recognize it in his Son? No, of course not. You do not recognize the enormous waste of energy you expend in denying truth. That's literally all of us all the time. Anytime we're believing in this world and believing it's real, we are wasting an enormous amount of energy trying to convince ourselves that the world is real. What would you say of someone who persists in attempting the impossible, believing that to achieve it is to succeed? That's exactly what egos do. They believe in the impossible and they think that they are succeeding and achieving things within the world. The belief that you must have the impossible in order to be happy is totally at variance with the principle of creation. God could not will that happiness depended on what you could never have. The fact that God is love does not require belief, but it does require acceptance. Okay? That's what we resist so much, is the acceptance. Why? Because we're identifying with ego. It is indeed possible for you to deny facts, although it is impossible for you to change them. All right, we can deny our truth, which here he's referring to as facts. We can deny it all we want, but he's saying it's impossible for us to change them. It's impossible for us to change who we are, the permanency of who we are, the oneness, the spirit of who we are. We cannot change that. That will never go away. If we're not seeing it, it's only because we are denying it and blocking it out. If you hold your hands over your eyes, you will not see because you are interfering with the laws of seeing. If you deny love, you will not know it because your cooperation is the law of its being. You cannot change laws you did not make, and the laws of happiness were created for you, not by you. All right? Because we did not create God. God created us. And this love, this extension of love, was created for us by God, because that was God's will. And because God created us and we are the same as God, it is also our will to extend love eternally with God in what we call heaven, which is just a state of oneness, a state of being, extending love eternally. So he's using the example that if we cover our eyes, we cannot see, right? So this is what we've been doing in our mind. We've been covering over the part of our mind that knows that we are spirit and simply denying it, not realizing that it's still there all along. It kind of reminds me when my youngest child was a toddler and we used to play hide and seek with her. She would lay down on the middle of the floor right here in the living room, and she would lay on her stomach and she would cover her eyes. And she thought that because she couldn't see us, that we couldn't see her. And that was her hiding place. So of course we would play along and pretend that we couldn't see her and make it last as long as it could. That memory just came to me when he's explaining how we can cover our eyes and pretend that we don't see, but really it's still there. Nothing went away. Just like my daughter thought that because she couldn't see us, that we couldn't see her. Like when an ostrich buries its head in the sand, it thinks it's hiding. That's us. That's what the ego does. Any attempt to deny what is must be fearful. And if the attempt is strong, it will induce panic. All right? That's why there's so much fear and anxiety in our world, because people do feel very panicked when they feel alone and they believe in separation. Willing against reality, though impossible, can be made into a very persistent goal even though you do not want it. But consider the result of this strange decision. You are devoting your mind to what you do not want. Okay? He's saying we're devoting our mind to ego, and we do not want the ego. How real can this devotion be? If you do not want it, it was never created. Right? God did not create the ego. We don't want the ego. If it were never created, it is nothing. This is another way of saying that ego and everything the ego believes is illusion. It's nothing. It's not even there. The only thing that's real is what God created, which is spirit. Can you really devote yourself to nothing? We sure try. We try real hard, don't we? God, in his devotion to you, created you devoted to everything and gave you what you are devoted to, love. Otherwise, you would not have been created perfect. Reality is everything, and you have everything because you are real. Okay? Our spirit self is real. You cannot make the unreal because the absence of reality is fearful, and fear cannot be created. As long as you believe that fear is possible, you will not create. Opposing orders of reality make reality meaningless, and reality is meaning. All right, so fear cannot be created because fear is not real. It's of the ego. Fear is not of God. In our truth, there is no fear. As long as we believe fear is possible, that means we're believing in the ego, and therefore we cannot create. Because we cannot create in this world, and we cannot create while we're identified with ego. When we join our mind with Holy Spirit, then we can create. And the only creation that can be done here is practicing forgiveness, is recognizing the truth everywhere within our dream. Remember then that God's will is already possible, and nothing else will ever be. This is the simple acceptance of reality, because only that is real. You cannot distort reality and know what it is. And if you do distort reality, you will experience anxiety, depression, and ultimately panic, because you are trying to make yourself unreal. When you feel these things, do not try to look beyond yourself for truth can only be within you. Say, therefore, and then he gives us a nice quote. Christ is in me, and where he is, God must be, for Christ is part of him. So Christ refers to Christ consciousness, which is a part of our mind. It's the same as the consciousness of Jesus. He awakened from this dream using the techniques that are described in his course to guide us to heal our split mind so that we can return our mind home to peace. So what we are seeking is not within the world. It's within us. It's within our mind. It is simply a change of perception.